Hello. In this video, we will look at the last few subgenres of narrative cinema. The next subgenre is science fiction or sci-fi. Science fiction has a long tradition. Scientific fantasies always have a futuristic structure. Fantasy also is a part of their structure. Science gives us the illusion of having a control on nature. It gives us the promise of overpowering it, that is, overpowering nature and using it for our own purposes. At the same time, it always poses the threat of going beyond our control. The machine taking power over its creator is a common theme in science fiction movies. Thus, the theme of technology versus humans is a favorite among the makers of science fiction. The fantasy of a computer turning more intelligent than its creator is a theoretical possibility. All these scenarios provide themes for sci fi makers. Such movies often present themes that are not acceptable to the discipline of science. Examples include A Trip to the Moon by George Méliès, and some of the other important sci-fi films include 2001 A Space Odyssey, the entire Star Wars series, Star Trek series, etc., the Matrix trilogy, or now the fourth film is also out now, Avatar, Interstellar, Children of Men, 12 Monkeys, etc. In Malayalam, Adishayan, Who and Nine are some of the sci-fi films. അപ്പോൾ സൈഫൈ ഓർ സയൻസ് ഫിക്ഷൻ എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത് എന്താ വെച്ചാൽ ട്രഡീഷണൽ സയൻസ്, അതായത് മെയിൻ സ്ട്രീം സയൻസിൽ ഇൻക്ലൂഡഡ് അല്ലാത്ത കാര്യങ്ങൾ. ഇറ്റ് യൂസസ് സ്പെക്യുലേറ്റീവ് ഡെപ്പിക്ഷൻസ് ഓഫ് സയൻസ് ആൻഡ് ടെക്നോളജി വിച്ച് ആർ നോട്ട് ഫുള്ളി ആക്സെപ്റ്റഡ് ബൈ മെയിൻ സ്ട്രീം സയൻസ്. The kind of scientific developments or technology that we see in sci-fi movies don't already exist today. So that is why scientific fantasies are usually futuristic. So because we are showing some certain developments in science which are likely to happen in the future. Some examples of such futuristic technologies used in sci-fi movies are aliens, robots, cyborgs, interstellar travel, time travel, etc. So all these can be seen in many of the sci-fi movies. Then, as we read here, there are different desires that we can see, desires and fears that are expressed through sci-fi. Like, human beings have a desire to control nature because we feel that nature is uncontrollable, untamable, and that human beings are at the mercy of nature. So we have this fantasy that using science and technology we will be able to control nature and to overpower nature. So that is one way in which we can approach sci-fi. But at the same time, certain other kinds of sci-fi are very dystopian in nature, very negative in nature, in the sense that it shows how machines, computers, robots, cyborgs, etc. Replace human beings, overpower human beings and take over the world, etc. So those kind of sci-fi themes are also seen. Now, even though sci-fi is a form of fantasy, and sometimes it can be combined with similar genres like fantasy and superhero films, because in many superhero films there are scientific explanations for why a superhero or a super villain gains those superpowers. So sci-fi, fantasy, superhero films, these are all related genres. Anyway, but apart from just being a fantasy genre, sci-fi is also used to comment or focus on socio-political issues or to explore philosophical concepts like what is the nature of humanity, what do we owe each other, etc. അപ്പോൾ എത്തിക്സ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഹ്യൂമൻ നേച്ചർ ഇതുപോലുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങളെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് ചിന്തിക്കാനും അതുപോലെ തന്നെ സോഷ്യോ പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ ഇഷ്യൂസിനെ പറ്റിയിട്ട് സംസാരിക്കാനും ഒക്കെ ഈ sci-fi ഫിലിംസ് യൂസ് ചെയ്യാറുണ്ട് ചിലപ്പോൾ. A very good example of that, which most of you would be familiar with, is the blockbuster sci-fi film Avatar. It's also a 3D film directed by James Cameron and released in 2009. Because Avatar, even though it is a fantasy, sci-fi, space exploration kind of film, it also has this virtual reality component and all that. It serves as a it served as a commentary on colonialism and neo-imperialism by multinational corporations. It makes certain kind of socially relevant commentaries on environmental degradation, etc. So even though it's a sci-fi film, it still has a lot of social relevance, and there are many such films like that. Then as I mentioned, and as the text mentioned, most of these sci-fi movies are futuristic, but there are also some films that are very related to sci-fi but set in the past. A subgenre of sci-fi called steampunk is an example. Steampunk incorporates retro-futuristic technology, outdated technology. Okay, so it is as if most of these steampunk movies are set in the 19th century, or rather are set in a fantastic world which uses technology and aesthetics that are inspired by 19th century industrial steam powered machinery. അപ്പോൾ ആ steam powered machinery അതിൻ്റെ ആ ടെക്നോളജി യൂട്ടിലൈസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് കൊണ്ടാണ്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അത് ഇൻസ്പയർഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള പുതിയ തരം ടെക്നോളജീസ് യൂട്ടിലൈസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് കൊണ്ടാണ് സ്റ്റീം പങ്ക് എന്നതിന് പറയുന്നത്. സോ സ്റ്റീം പങ്ക് ഇസ് എ സബ് ജാൻർ ഓഫ് സയൻസ് ഫിക്ഷൻ. Other subgenres include diesel punk. That's something like Mad Max. The movie Mad Max is considered to be an example of diesel punk. And cyberpunk, movies like Blade Runner, the Matrix trilogy, etc., where there is it's difficult to see a difference between human and robot or human and cyborg. Those kind of movies are called part of something called cyberpunk. So steampunk, cyberpunk, diesel punk, all these are different subgenres of science fiction as well. Okay, now the next subgenre is road movies. Road movies too have a rich tradition like sci-fi. They are similar to certain serial narratives in literature. They exploit the possibilities of rapid temporal and spatial shifts. Along with the change in time and place, characters also can change. Seemingly unrelated events are stringed together in them. They make use of the paradigm of a journey into the unknown. What is in store for the traveler is a mystery. The journey usually becomes crucial in his or her life and helps immensely in the formation of the personality. The traveler ends up in unusual and mysterious circumstances. A road movie by its structure exploits all these possibilities. The genre has its roots in American cinema, which had its inception during the classic Hollywood period. Road movies flourished post-1950s, with the counterculture movement contributing tremendously to its growth. Some of the important road movies are Easy Rider, Into the Wild, Itu Mama Tambien, The Motorcycle Diaries, Kings of the Road. And then in Malayalam, they have mentioned films like Neelagasham Pachakadal Chuvanna Bhoomi, which itself is inspired by Motorcycle Diaries, Rani Padmini, Veetilekkulla Vadi, Brahmaram, North Iratnale Kadam, etc. So the road movie is basically a film where the majority of the time, during the majority of the narrative, the main characters spend their time on the road. So it is usually in the form of a bike trip or a trip in a car or something like that. The characters go on a journey which is not just literal but also metaphorical. So they are going away from familiar spaces, away from civilization, out into the open road, etc. So the trip produces a lot of changes in them. So it's about how certain characters leave their comfort zones behind and journey out into the world, encounter difficult situations, encounter very different kinds of characters, and interact with them, and how all these experiences together change them, shape them. Because of that, many of these road movies also function as stories about growing up and coming of age. A very good example is the film Motorcycle Diaries itself, which is about the coming of age of Che Guevara. So he was initially a medical student, and he and his friend went on a trip, and the difficulties of the people whom he encountered on the trip actually transformed him into that rebellious figure, into that radical icon who would come to be later known as Che Guevara. So that is very classic example of a road trip. And as I mentioned already, the Malayalam film Neelakasham Pachakadal Chuvanna Bhumi is also similar. It also follows a similar plot line, and it is very much inspired by Motorcycle Diaries. So a road movie has not just a literal journey but also a metaphorical journey. And another important aspect is that since the characters are moving away from civilization, away from their hometowns, etc., many times road movies show a certain kind of rebellion against conservative social norms. And a very good example is the movie Easy Rider, which they have mentioned, which is set during the counterculture, during the American counterculture of the 1960s, the time of hippies and other kind of beats and all that. So it shows it is about the youth subcultures of people who would leave orthodox society behind and go on journeys of self-discovery on their bikes. So that is important. And sometimes these movies also make commentaries about leaving modernity behind, leaving the trappings of modernity behind and looking for an alternative kind of existence. Road movies are different from action movies. There are many action films which are set on the road, like Speed and all, and many Fast and Furious. All these are all set on the road. But the main difference between road movies and action movies is that action movies focus on the action, on the certain kind of speed and action and power dynamics and all that. But road movies function more on the internal conflicts and transformations of characters, the main characters. So that is the main difference. Road movies are a lot more reflective, meditative, etc. And as already mentioned in your textbook, the structure of a road movie is usually a lot more open-ended. So it will not have a very it may not have a very cohesive plot. It may be very episodic in structure. It is just about the experiences of these characters. So it may not have a traditional kind of beginning, middle, end, that kind of a plot. But usually we see that there is some kind of a transformation that has happened to the characters, or something that they have learned, either a discovery about the world or a kind of self-discovery. All that is seen in road movies. Mostly these movies tend to be rather masculinist. They have a masculinity is a very important aspect of this, especially because it is about getting away from the domestic sphere, getting away from your home and going out on the road. And traditionally, classically, that has been something that only men could do. So road movies have classically tended to be a masculine genre, but there are exceptions too. Feminist perspectives on road movies are provided by films like Thelma and Louise. Thelma and Louise is a very beautiful film about two women who go on a road trip, who decide to go on a road trip, but from the beginning their road trip is completely spoiled because they are women and they have to encounter a lot of horrible oppositions. But it is still a very how do I say, it's still a very positive film. It's still a very powerful film, showing how these women battle against those kind of conditions and the sheer joy and freedom that they gain from a road trip. And the Malayalam film Rani Padmini is a kind of comic movie that is inspired by Thelma and Louise. So it's not a direct inspiration. The plot is very different, but that also follows two women who end up together and then who somehow go on a road trip, but in a more comic manner. Then again, road movies have classically tended to be to focus on the adventures and the experiences of white men. But again, there are exceptions. Spike Lee, who is a famous African American filmmaker, has made a film called Get on the Bus, which is also a road movie, but the characters are black people on a bus during the civil rights protests. And this film highlights the role of buses in the American civil rights movement, because we know that a lot of civil rights protests started because black people were denied seats on public buses, right? So all these there are all these different aspects. So road movies are also films which can make very socially relevant statements. The next three, actually there are three more subgenres mentioned here, but they are not actually genres or subgenres, they are more like formats. Okay, so it's not fair to actually club them under the umbrella term genres as your textbook has done, but yeah, we will still go through those. These are formats in which films can be taken. The first of these three is digital movies. Digital film is a leap forward from the historical use of reels of motion picture films. It's an example of the way in which technological advancements have benefited cinema. Filmmaking and distribution had been cumbersome in the past. Cumbersome means burdensome, very difficult. Digital technology has provided easy accessibility to films. Now films can be accessed online and screened that way. Heavy projectors with actual films have become a thing of the past. The arrival of digital technology revolutionized cinema, especially the way it was made. The making became less expensive and more democratic. The premiere of films on OTT platforms like Amazon Prime, Netflix, etc. is a recent trend in this regard. In a sense, it has been initiated by the pandemic situation, but there are indications that the new trend has come to stay. It also offers a wider choice to the audience. The first digital movie in the history of world cinema is Windhorse, which came out in 1998. The first digital film in Malayalam is Moonamadoral, which came out in 2006. So again, digital film basically is not a genre, it is a format. It just basically refers to films in which the production, the post-production, or the distribution, or all three, or a combination of these, are done through the use of digital technology. So earlier we had physical film stock, celluloid, which were used in making films with huge cameras and all that. That is now replaced by digital cameras using digital technology to capture images and sound and all that. And film editing, post-production processes like editing, mixing, etc. were earlier done physically. The editors would sit and physically cut and paste together the pieces of film, the film rolls. They will cut out the unnecessary parts, and they will paste together the scenes that they want to paste together and all that. That is how films were edited previously, but now all that is done through digital technology, through certain apps and through certain kind of softwares. Also distribution, that is where they are talking about all these OTT releases. Earlier films were distributed, the actual films, film petti enokka parayallo, those were taken. So basically the film rolls were taken in boxes, and they were physically transported to the different theaters, and the projection, there would be a huge projection machinery using which the film would be projected onto the screen. But in digital cinema, all that is not there. There are many films which are made using digital technology, but which are still projected in the theaters. So all digital films are not directly coming onto OTT platforms. Digitally produced films are also being shown in theaters, but at the same time there are even in distribution and exhibition, there are the influences of digital technology can be seen when we look at how films are now being distributed directly through OTT platforms and other such digital means. So that is mostly about digital films. The next is telefilms, which is also a format. It basically just means films made for television. See, why I say these are formats is because I hope you understand that it is about the kind of technology that is used to make these films. It is not about the narratives or the plots or the characters or any other kind of narrative features. ബാക്കിയുള്ള എല്ലാ ജാനേഴ്സിലും നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത് നാരറ്റീവ് എലിമെൻറ്റ്സ് ആണ്. വേറാസ് ഈ മൂന്നെണ്ണത്തിൽ നമ്മൾ അതിനെ ഡിസ്റ്റിങ്വിഷ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് അതിൻ്റെ പ്രൊഡക്ഷൻ എങ്ങനെയാണ്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതിൻ്റെ ഫോമാറ്റ് എന്താണെന്നുള്ളത് അനുസരിച്ചായിരിക്കും. സോ ഡിജിറ്റൽ മൂവീസ് ക്യാൻ ബി ഓഫ് എനി ഓഫ് ദ ജാനേഴ്സ് മെൻഷൻഡ് അബവ്. Similarly, telefilms can also be of any genre, but basically what we call telefilms are films that are made primarily for television. Telefilm, television film. So these were coming up at a time when television was becoming popular, and films would be made. Classically, films would be made to be exhibited in film theaters, right? But when films are made to be exhibited directly on television, they are called telefilms. So many of these initially would be of very low production quality, because the revenue that you would get from screening these telefilms would be much less than the revenue you got from screening films in film theaters. So initially telefilms were like that. They would be of low production quality and low production value, and maybe even of actually low quality. And initially they used to utilize a lot of close-up shots. They would be set inside houses and other kind of locations. Interior shots were mostly used and close-up shots were used, but then over time that also started to change. Now even a film that is shown on television or on YouTube or any of these digital networks can have the same kind of look and feel and production quality as a film that is to be exhibited in a theater. Films made primarily for television are known as telefilms. They often are serialized depending on the compulsions of TV telecasts. Every program is fragmented to accommodate advertisements on TV. Telefilms follow the structure of telecast. Telefilms also are evolving in tune with technological developments. From being a medium of close-ups, TV has evolved to accommodate different shot sizes. This kind of progressive change is observable if we make a historical analysis of telefilms. There are soap operas, also known as teleserials, which have a huge number of audience. Other types of television series include investigation, horror, or mystery thrillers, have also gained popularity during the course of time, which took a new avatar in the form of web series on OTT platforms recently. Telefilms are accused of compromising on quality as it is aimed at the mini screen and family audience, yet the genre has produced some stellar works, and many a director who started his or her career making telefilms has later made it big on the silver screen. Hum Log, a Hindi television drama, was the first one to be aired in India. It was telecast on Doordarshan and over 150 episodes were aired. The 1990s saw the arrival of mega serials, and some even telecast more than 1,000 episodes. So here they are basically just talking about all kinds of films and series that are made for television, and as a continuation they are also talking about the other kinds of dramas and series that are nowadays releasing on OTT platforms. So that is mostly about telefilms. ടെലിവിഷന് വേണ്ടി ഉണ്ടാക്കുന്ന ഫിലിംസാണ്. അതിൻ്റെ ഇനീഷ്യലി ടെക്നോളജിക്കൽ ചാലഞ്ചസും ഫിനാൻഷ്യൽ കൺസ്ട്രെയിൻസും കാരണം അത് പ്രത്യേക രീതിയിലാണ് ഉണ്ടാക്കിയിരുന്നത്. ചിലപ്പോൾ ചില പ്രോഗ്രാംസിനിടയിലുള്ള സ്പേസ് ഉൾക്കൊള്ളാൻ പാകത്തിന് അങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ ഷോർട്ടർ ആയിരിക്കും. ആദ്യത്തെ ടെലിഫിലിംസൊക്കെ they are much shorter than the films that are exhibited in the theaters, because they have to fit within certain they have to fit within the constraints of television broadcasting. But of course we can see how these have changed, and nowadays such short films are being released on YouTube and many other digital platforms as well. Now, the final section we have to study is 3D films. Again, this is a format and not a genre. You can have many different genres in 3D films. The traditional pattern of films is 2D. 2D means two dimensions. 3D or three-dimensional screening is a new innovation in the sphere of cinema. It gives three-dimensional views to the audience, and special paraphernalia is required to view 3D films, including specially designed goggles or glasses. Paraphernalia here just means equipment. 3D films are made using 3D technology, and in order to watch them you need to have a certain kinds of special equipment as well. Now, all of you know, if you go to the movies, if you go to the theater to watch a 3D film, they will give you special kind of glasses. If you watch without that, it will look very strange, it will look very blurred, but if you watch with that, you can see the three-dimensional effects. What 3D films actually do is to give an impression of three-dimensional solidity and depth, because depth is something that is very difficult to convey, and 3D films try to convey depth, because when you're actually walking around in the world, things are three-dimensional, they are not two-dimensional, whereas photographs, paintings, and even cinema is actually just two-dimensional. Therefore, there is something that is lost when you transform something that is three-dimensional into something that is two-dimensional. And 3D films are trying to get over that loss. Okay, where did I stop? Yeah, 3D film is a unique visual experience nearer to reality than normal viewing. But it has not become a new stage in the historical progress of cinema for a number of reasons. The images are a bit unsettling, and it lands the viewer in disorientation. Apart from its fancy value, it has not become the norm of new viewing experiences. So this is also not completely true, not completely wrong either, because there are certain films that lend themselves very much to 3D technology, and we know that a lot of the blockbusters, action films, superhero films, all the Avengers, the Marvel and DC films, all of them, many of them use 3D technology. And the interesting thing about 3D films is that initially, in the early days, 3D technology was used as a spectacle. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു റിയലിസ്റ്റിക് ആയിട്ടൊരു സിനിമ കാണുന്നതിനെക്കാട്ടിലും നമുക്കതിനൊരു സ്പെക്ടാക്കുലർ വാല്യൂ കിട്ടാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ടാണ് നമ്മൾ 3D സിനിമ കണ്ടിരുന്നത്. ഫോർ എക്സാമ്പിൾ, ദ മലയാളം ഫിലിം മൈ ഡിയർ കുട്ടിച്ചാത്തൻ, വിച്ച് വാസ് one of the first 3D films to be made in India, that actually had all these things like it was directed towards children. The children were the main audience of that film, and they had things like balloons floating towards you and things like that. And in the early action films, even in Hollywood films, you would have things like weapons coming straight at you and to shock you and all that. So 3D technology was initially used as a spectacle to jolt or shock the audience and to delight the audience. But nowadays, that is still being done, but nowadays 3D technology is used to give a greater illusion of reality, because as I said earlier, the reality around us is three-dimensional. We can perceive objects with all their three-dimensional aspects, with all their depths, etc. If we are walking into a room, we can perceive the depth. If we keep walking, things move around us. So all that that is how reality actually works for us. And 3D technology nowadays is trying to give us the illusion of reality, to make us feel closer to reality. So that's an interesting thing. Earlier it was something unrealistic and fantastic. Now it is something that is trying to bring us closer and closer to reality. A very good example is the movie Gravity. So Hollywood movie about astronauts who are lost in space, and that really uses 3D technology to give us the feeling of movement and how you float in space and things like that. Then, the distinction of being the first 3D film is credited to The Power of Love, which premiered in 1922 in Los Angeles. The 1980s and 90s saw the popularity of 3D films rapidly increasing, and many films specially made for children appeared in 3D format. At this point, we should also mention the role of Disney, the Disney pictures, which are mostly animated film, but they also really used 3D to great effect. And now there is a particular subgenre or subtype of animation films. Animation films is also a format I had mentioned, not a genre. So within the animation films format also we have 3D animation. So the role of Disney is very important here. Then, the release of Avatar in 2009, directed by James Cameron, was a path-breaking story of success in the history of 3D cinema, as such films started to flood the silver screen thereafter. So, with Avatar, there came to be this idea that entire films can be made with 3D rather than just some aspects of or some scenes being in 3D. It became clear that entire films can be made using 3D technology, and all these blockbusters following Avatar, like all the superhero movies that we watch now, and many such big budget movies use 3D technology. The contemporary age is witnessing the trend of a number of classics from the past, especially animation films being restructured into 3D and re-released. So apart from films that are made in 3D and released in 3D, nowadays we also see many films that were initially made in 2D that are now being converted into 3D. But many people, including the director James Cameron, have pointed out that that is not actually very effective, because if the film is not originally meant for 3D and then you kind of superimpose 3D technology on it, you might end up with a lower quality product, and that might actually work against the future of 3D films in the industry, because people will get turned off from these kind of inferior products. So that is another thing that is happening. Examples of 3D films include Toy Story, Gravity, Life of Pi. It's actually Pi, not PIE, Hugo, etc. And in Malayalam, My Dear Kuttichathan was the first 3D film to be made, and films such as Magic and Dracula followed. Now, one more thing that I want to mention here is that after 3D technology, now we also have other technologies like 4D, 5D, 7D, 9D, 12D, etc. All these numbers don't really matter. Basically, it just means that it is trying to give us more or an increased effect of reality. It is trying to make cinema much more interactive. So these kind of 4D and all have not become so popular that actual narrative films are being made with it. Mostly they are there are 4D theaters, 7D theaters and all in malls and all. So there are small spaces where you can go and experience something. So here, apart from just three-dimensionality and depth, you can also feel things like movement. So if you're watching what is called a 4D film, when your seat will move, making you feel that you are actually experiencing it. Then with 5D, apart from the seat movement, you also get to sense certain things. Like if the wind is blowing in the film, then you will also get to experience the wind. If there is rain, you will get to experience a little bit of the rain. If there is snow, you will get to experience a little bit of the snow, etc. Then there are also interactive aspects, like you can interact with the things that are happening there, and this is mostly used in games. So this is what we nowadays call virtual reality or VR, where you can it is also called an immersive experience. So you can get much more immersed in the world of that film. You can interact with the characters, you can shoot a character, you can gain points after shooting a character, etc. So all this is used mostly for games nowadays and not so much for cinema as such. But these technologies also exist, and they are like a progression of 3D technology, and who knows, maybe in the future we will also have films that are being made using these kind of technologies. So with that, we conclude the discussion of the different types of genres of narrative cinema, and hopefully all these are clear. Otherwise, please let me know if any clarifications are needed. Thank you.